It's one of. Is it? Do you want to come up, Kevin? Yay! Awesome. Okay. I don't know where the picture's from, but hi, Gillian.
Oh, hey, Jillian. Hey, nice to meet you.
Jillian, hi. So I think to start off, we'll have everyone introduce themselves and what film they're part of. We can start on Zoom with Jillian, and then we'll do it in person.
Awesome.
Oh, Jillian, you can go first and introducing yourself and your film.
Oh, should I do that now?
Yeah, we're good to go. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jillian, and I worked on public services.
Awesome. Who would like to go next for an in-person film?
I'm Patrick Tarrant. I made privately owned public space.
I'm Kevin Mathine with No More Room in Hell.
And I'm Rebecca, also with No More Room in Hell.
Thank you all for being here, both virtually and in person. I don't want to misquote this essay. It was a long time ago in grad school. But watching this program, I remember thinking, like one of the classes we discussed Hana and the notion of like the public spacing, like for example, we just like in being like New York, like somewhere like the subway can be this very public space, but very place is easily to be anonymous and would have, or maybe a space where people don't care for each other. I guess as an opening question for these works about landscape and place, I would be curious to think it through with each of you an idea of the expectations and resentments that place can hold, and the way that place can also be somewhat sentient in a way, which I feel like each of these works are touching at in different ways, but where, yes, there is a very human impact of it, but it's almost like the non-human is having the conversation, and then the humans are responding to that, if that makes sense. So, who would like to jump in first? We can start in person this time because we did Zoom first. So, Rebecca?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess the non-humans are parallels to the humans, or like byproducts of the humans in No More Room in Hell. The car is, you know, a vehicle which is trained by the human to drive autonomously, and the zombies are the humans once they've, you know, lost their selfhood. And the steel industry is a landscape created by humans. But yeah, I think like these things come to a head in our film, in the sense that the question of consumption of that sentient landscape by humans is brought to the foreground, and like at what point is the consumption violent or dangerous, and how does that affect both like the people and the landscape itself?
Yeah. Patrick?
Thanks for the sentient thing. That certainly resonates with me. I think that often when I'm filming landscape, because I tend not to film people, like as in not intimately, I spy on them all the time. I think it's been a bit of an ongoing interest for me, the idea that the landscape is, you know, alive and saying things and doing things. With this project, my little log line is something like the everyday choreography stipulated by privately owned public space. And so there's a shot towards the end in a tunnel with the bright lights all down one side, and eventually one woman enters the frame and somebody's talking nonsense over the top of that. But I think that image, I think the one relation I have to the idea that the landscape is like a being of some sort is especially sort of being inside of it.
Mm.
And so that would be like an intestinal tract or something, that particular tunnel. Anyway, that's just to say that that's sort of an idea that does kind of excite me. And I certainly think with the King's Cross development, it's all about control. And, as we move through it, we imagine we are sort of controlling ourselves, but we're not or something.
Yeah, could I?
Yeah.
I think in a lot of the image in our film No More Room in Hell, the objects which are there in the collected, like in the automatic kind of collection of the data and things, and the comparison between the landscape, which is seen by the kind of the camera or like the car, and then what is not, and the difference between that and what we see or kind of like play in the landscape, I guess.
Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your earlier point about the landscape being anonymized in certain spaces, I think, that's part of the critique of what's happening with the sculptures is that they're being designed in a vacuum, but in fact, they're being placed in like really specific communities and not really thinking about the people that are actually living with them. And I think, public spaces are inherently complex, and good things and bad things can happen in them, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth investing in and worth experimenting and providing resources for all sorts of different publics. I think Tracy's memory of like the playground, there's a lot there in terms of her knowledge of that space and what it means to be in a community and understand a landscape just by being proximate to the slide, right? And I think we can value those things and uplift that type of knowledge as well.
I think that's also a great lead into my second question. Most of us were yesterday when Cully Sears showed the Lost Season, and there was a large conversation about situating oneself as a filmmaker to landscape and temporal collapse in that. In Kelly's film, she's looking towards the future in a different way, but I would say that your film is also very future oriented. While Patrick, I feel it's fair to say your film is very contemporary. And Jillian, I think that like you bring up the argument, the discussion of memory, there's a way that even if the images are contemporary, we're viewing it through there's a lens of both memory and past with that. So I would be curious if each of you could speak to both situating yourself to these landscapes with the current time frame you're working in, and then situating them to these landscapes in the time frame you wish to work in.
Can I just ask you to repeat that last bit about you threw me just a little bit with the time I want to work in. Can you just rephrase that?
Your first encounter with these images and filming them, and then like in the case of like Jillian and Rebecca, like you're pushing those images to the future or the past. In the case of your film making contemporary work, but there's still, as your film acknowledges, restructuring of that, like resituating, I guess, how you resituate yourself to those landscapes the first time, and then
Can I just jump in with one thing? I attended a kind of a presentation at my university, and there was lots of stimulating conversations, and the outcome of it was to come home and start writing something called "You Made the Wrong Movie," and it was a response to this film, and what I was thinking about was running along the canal and encountering these enormous cranes which were uniformly kind of spaced, and we see them in one shot from reverse angle, and so you're down low at the level of the canal, and these things are enormous, and that's before the Google campus started to take shape. And I sort of thought, oh, you should have just made just that movie of just what it was like to stand, just sort of the overwhelming kind of monstrous nature, the scale, and the little me. And I sort of thought, oh, it would have been so much fun if you'd worked out how to make just that movie about that sort of encounter. So it was funny to sort of like, end the whole process with the desire to sort of, do it differently. That was interesting.
I think that's a fair response to this kind of question. Jillian, Rebecca, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I'm from Baltimore, but I'm also like a white middle class girl. Like when I think about my relationship to Baltimore's landscape, I feel sensitive that, like all of the work that I make about Baltimore is just about like how I'm putting together these pieces, and these histories from my own lens. It's not like a definitive sort of take on the landscape. Like most, post-industrial American cities, Baltimore's really, really complicated. And so I do want to note that, like, I'm approaching it in a very particular way. I will say the images of the past, the images of the playgrounds at the very end were some of the last things I found. I was looking in the wrong like newspaper database, and I found this other smaller newspaper. But those images to me really unlocked like a new idea in terms of like actually in the past there is precedent for public experimentation. Baltimore has a huge, very vibrant history of lots of artists working in the space, but maybe, that's not the type of work that the city has always supported, and to me, the fact that when we finally found those images, it was like, oh, wow, this is evidence that you can do these really amazing experimental community projects, but also this sort of like deep sadness that that they've all been dismantled and taken down. And so if we know that we have done this in the past, looking forward towards the future, what would it look like to really like systemically fund that sort of work and like enter a new chapter of the 1% for Art movement, because it is actually on the books. It's in the city code. It's just not enforced anymore. So.
Thank you.
I think in terms of looking back and forward and using the zombie as a vehicle to think about that, the zombie as a creature that sort of defies a notion of time and that it's continuous, it lives past when it's really supposed to. I was trying to understand Pittsburgh, and I appreciate what Jillian said about the post-industrial landscape, right? As this like, how is history repeating itself in a sense? And I was finding that in this mining of natural resources and then this data mining I was witnessing, just kind of like standing on the street and seeing these companies driving these cars, collecting data to scan that would later be used to train these vehicles. That would be, the next industry. And that is the big industry in Pittsburgh now, is robotics. And so in a lot of old steel mills, you see this like industrial reuse project of, okay, we're going to put a big robotics firm here. We're going to put an Uber test track. We're going to do all of this stuff with the hope that it revitalizes. But fundamentally, like the process of extraction from the land and the community is similar, I feel.
Thank you. I think this is a good time to open up for questions. Okay, we have one right here.
Hey, so it seems like when I was watching all these movies, the going theme is that change is coming through disruption. So we have maybe media attention, public art in different spaces, emerging technology, and clearly we have a range of effectiveness of how that is having positive impact or negative impact. As you were creating this and also reflecting on it, what do you feel are the most positive ways to disrupt kind of the commonplace and work toward a more successful future together that actually imparts beneficial impacts on our communities versus sometimes more face value, say, of a giant development saying, oh, we'll put some public art here, to a Band-Aid to cover it up, or switching out one industry with another that might be equally negative. So yeah, what do you think would be the most positive way that we could change for the better, I guess?
Why don't we start? We ended it in person, so why don't we start on Zoom with Jillian, and then we'll circle back in person.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, Baltimore has like a really rich history of like guerrilla art projects. And I think being able to see it from a more macro view and connecting those artists with, different communities and different school groups and paying them for their work, paying them to make sure that it's actually, a well-rounded experience for everyone and everyone's has sort of an equal, investment. I feel like locality is kind of like my central thesis here, that paying attention to what's in your neighborhood, to what people are doing around you, like that is the way that we build community. I would also say like part of the reason that we have the dynamic art scene that we do is that, until recently, like rent is relatively cheap. So I think there's a lot the city could do, economically to support people here in terms of like rent control and, just giving out more grants in general to working artists. I think, creating a place that's maybe like, not dominated by tech in the way that we see Pittsburgh becoming, or like Austin, for example, like it needs to be an affordable place where people can, make work and engage with their neighbors in a way that, we're really invested in each other's lives, which I think happened a lot, in the pandemic in particular. But if we had the time and space to slow down and really embrace each other, that would be wonderful.
I think just avoiding like mass collection and mass data is important. So I don't know how that builds community, but it's definitely destroying community. So that's, in my opinion, the best way moving forward.
It builds community by protecting community. So
there we go.
Yeah, and I think like more generally in Pittsburgh, just like I guess like I could say the horror genre, right? I'm playing with the horror genre, not as a means to like scare or frighten, but as to like in the tradition of horror bringing attention to social issues in the way Romero's films brought attention to social issues and racial dynamics. And he was doing this in Pittsburgh in a place that was really confronting these things in that moment in time, in this era of deindustrialization. So I was kind of like, if I were to make his films now, what would I be talking about? And I think it's about like identifying patterns and across time and being able to say, okay, like we've been here, we're feeling the result of that moving forward, right? I'm identifying a similar pattern happening. How do we circumvent if we've been here before?
Patrick?
So I know I've got a lot of thoughts spinning around, but I mean, I think that one thing that I feel like I should say is that, I partly make this film because then I can ride my bike to the estate 100 times. And that seems to me to be like a good use of my time. Like that makes me happy or something. If you then extend that to kind of, like my experience of trying to understand this thing going up over, say, a decade, and me not knowing what it was at first, and even to this day, sort of in many ways, sort of struggling to understand what it was. So in visiting it 100 times and sort of working on it for so many hours, I'm sort of describing just a kind of a selfish relation to it, which is to say that out of all of that, I feel like I kind of know a little bit about King's Cross Central development, but it's quite particular what I'm describing, by which I mean I don't think that the film creates the same opportunities for an audience. I don't think that they necessarily come away sort of thinking, oh, now I understand my environment so much better now or something. So that another couple of things I wanted to quickly say. I wrestled with the film a lot. It was hard to make for me and slow and painful because I thought that the best approach was to make the space as attractive as I could and not actually tell the audience what to think about it. But I sort of never succeeded, in part because I was using music that I recorded on site. And so it all just became a bit sort of too nice or something. And so in the end, as you see, I become explicit and I start to act out and break the image and all these sorts of things. So in the end, I do a version of what I wanted to do, but nothing like it really. In the end, I sort of, I don't know, give you what you want, give me what I want. there was something else I was going to say, but I've talked enough, so I'll leave it at that.
I think we have time for like one or two more questions. Lynn and then Mada, and then that we would probably have to wrap up after that.
Language. I think that because you can't have the same experience as me, and despite all the images, one thing that I do like to emphasize is the language that people use, and hence me giving so much time to crazy talk, like categorizing employees into 4 categories. Like all of a sudden that just, oh, well, that makes it so much easier for everybody now. So yeah, maybe language is a bit of a takeaway there.
So I wanted to say I had a very profound and maybe poignant response to this, to seeing There Is No Room in Hell, because it didn't feel like a film about zombies. It felt like a film about our time now. And it made me think about the homeless encampments and the disappearing of those bodies, and maybe the idea that it's not that you're saying there is no room in hell, but it makes us think, is there no room here for those bodies? And I also thought about Gaza. You know, is there no room for these two groups of people to share this land? You know, especially because you had a lot of imagery that was very, very reminiscent of the kind of satellite views that we have of before a bomb is dropped. So it functioned in this ethereal way and reference it to film, but then it went way past that for me.
Yeah, I can respond. Hi, Lynn. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think that the idea that there's no more room in hell, right? That I think that it comes from a point in Dawn of the Dead. This is really horror nerdy. It comes from a point of Dawn of the Dead where one of the characters is explaining where the zombies come from. They're us, you know, they're us, this kind of like aptitude for horror. I think that's why the zombie is the scariest creature, right? They're so close to us. They show how creaturely we can be, how horrid we can be, this thirsty kind of violent, taking, over consuming creature. And so yeah, I think when I was making this film, I thought a lot about, well, the zombie is so effective at collapsing the space between the idea of us and our potential for monstrosity. It reflects back to us the reality of that potential. And on the note of like horrific imagery, it makes sense that you're making those connections, because I was in graduate school at Carnegie Mellon watching like across campus people developing technologies that are, you know, funded by the Department of Defense. The technology that goes into these cars is not just used for these cars. They're developed for military vehicles first and foremost. Then it comes to the consumer market. And so I think the intertwining of all of these things is the reality of at least that place I was right then. And I think the echoes and ripples out are because they quite literally do ripple out of this small place.
Thank you. Mada?
I loved your film, Rebecca. My question is a little bit related to Lynn's question and also a little bit horror nerdy. And I was thinking of, you know, Romero makes like 6 zombie films, and in all of those, in each and every one of those films, the zombies are like representing something else. He keeps like reinventing what the zombie stands for. And in seeing your film, I was thinking of probably, it was just my guess that maybe you are thinking of like archive and pre-existing material and, I don't know, repurposed, reappropriated footage and material as the zombie that is, you know, making a return. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
That's like a huge part of my research and philosophy, not only in this project, but like just more broadly speaking. So I really appreciate you saying that and finding that in the film. It's not apparent to me that it's immediately present. But but yeah, like these documents that kind of live in the past, and then I'm reviving, reanimating, recreating a sort of new narrative too, is absolutely a part of my interest. And also, like, yeah, when I was in the Romero archive looking through these scripts, I just kept feeling like my hand was the reanimator. I was taking this dead thing or something that is dead and preserved in an archive. What gets to be there? What I'm being told is like, you know, stuff that the archive wants me to share, stuff that they're like, please don't, you know, distribute this as publicly. And that kind of mediation of what gets to live on and what doesn't was of interest to me. And so, yeah, absolutely. I don't know what more I can say. I could say a lot more, but I'll finish there.
I think that's a beautiful note for us to wrap up on. But thank you to all of our filmmakers. All these films are nominated for the Audience Award, which you could vote out there, I think. And at 8 p.m., we have another screen, so stick around.